Time now to introduce you to our very first speaker. She's waiting patiently for us in Helsinki. Her name is Dr. Peggie Rothe, and she is the Chief Insights and Research Officer at Leesman. Now, Leesman is a company, a leading company in the world using data to help better understand employee experience. And she's going to be helping us understand what the pressure points are of home working and the impact on our physical offices and how we interact with one another in the workplace during the pandemic. So, Peggie, we can cross over to you now on the screen. Great to see you here. Great to have you with us. And the floor is yours to give us the first presentation of the day.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And hello, everyone. I am super excited to be here today and to be sharing some really interesting insights around home working. So today, essentially, I wanted to help you kind of make sense of workplace after the crisis. And I think that there are numerous questions that need to be answered in order to simply make sense of that. Now, I certainly do not have all the answers. I also don't have time to go through all of the questions that I think one needs to answer. So I'm going to focus on three main ones. First of all, is home working working? Second, we're going to have a look at, well, how have potentially needs and expectations changed during the pandemic? And last but not least, I'm going to look a bit forward and reflect on what may be the role of the office in the future. And all of this based on the data that we have collected. Now, in order to give you a bit of a sense of what this data is, a really short nutshell intro to Leesman. What you need to know is that our purpose is essentially to make better places of work. So the only thing that we do, we focus on measuring the experience that people have of those places. So we help organizations understand how well their workplaces are working, that people are working in. And this is really all we do. So we are not consultants, we're not advisors, we're not designers, nothing else. We simply focus on measuring the experience that people have of those places that they work in. And the reason that we stay away from doing all that other stuff is simply because we want to ensure that the measurement that we provide...
Thanks. The only...
Oh, sorry, I'm hearing something in the background. Yeah, sorry. So we want to make sure that the measurement that we provide is completely 100% independent. So we have absolutely no vested interest in the results that we measure or that we get when we measure the experience. Now, how do we measure experience? I think the only way that you can really do that is by asking the people whose experience you want to measure. And so we do that with completely standardized online surveys. Now, we actually have a number of them. I'm sure most of you may be familiar with the first one, the Leesman Office Survey, which is perhaps the core one that we use most. It's the one that focuses on office environments and measures people's experience of their office workplace. We have a number of other ones as well, and the newest addition to the pack is the last one there that you see, the Leesman Homeworking Survey that we introduced back in March. And today, essentially, I'm going to be talking about the data that we have collected from those two surveys. So with the Leesman Office, we're fast actually approaching 800,000 responses. And with the Homeworking Survey, we're already up at over 125,000 responses. Now, just so that you understand what this data is, also lastly, a very brief overview of what is it actually that we ask in these surveys and what is it that we measure when we measure experience. So this is the structure of the Homeworking Survey, but all of our surveys essentially follow a very similar structure. So first of all, we have a section where we ask about which activities are important to you and how well are those activities supported. We then have a section that looks at what is your general perception of the impact of the environment? So here we ask questions such as, does your environment enable you to work productively? Do you feel a sense of connection to your colleagues and the organization? And so forth. Out of those two sections, we then calculate our main KPI, which is the overall experience score for the environment. The score is called LMI, which is simply an abbreviation of Leesman Index. It's a number from 0 to 100, which tells you in that one number how good is this environment for these people? Now, when we talk about the office environment, it's simply called LMI. When we talk about the home environment, you also get an LMI, but it's called simply the home LMI, therefore the abbreviation HLMI. And I will be referring to these LMI scores throughout the presentation, so please keep in mind that it is a score of the higher the better. Then in addition, we also collect data on the various different features that you need. So we ask what's important and how satisfied are you with those environment features that you have available to you. Last but not least, we also ask a number of background questions, which then enable us to do interesting cutting and slicing and internal comparisons in the data. That's it for an intro. So let's dig into what the data is saying. And I'm going to keep this fairly fast-paced, and there's going to be a lot of data. So I hope you have do hold on to your seats and join the ride. So starting off with, is homeworking working? Now, I think the best way really to answer that question is to look at that HLMI that I just explained. So the overall experience score for all the 127,000 respondents who have reported to us working from home is 74.2. Now, that to give you a bit of a perception or a perspective to that number, as I said, it's a number from 0 to 100, where the higher, the better. And currently, the overall experience of office environments sits at 63. So it's quite significantly higher than the average experience in workplaces. It's actually also higher than the threshold where we draw of what the LMI needs to be for us to say that you have an outstanding experience, which is 70 on that scale. So on average, basically, we can say that employees are having a fairly good experience working from home. We can naturally then look at more detailed questions, and one of our key questions really is about productivity. Does your environment enable you to work productively? And what we see currently is that over 80% of those working from home have said, yes, working from home enables me to work productively. And again, that score is actually quite a lot higher than the equivalent score that we have recorded across all the workplaces that we've measured up till today. And in fact, it is also higher than the Leesman Plus score. Now, Leesman Plus is the group of workplaces that have met our criteria in order to be recognized as high-performing workplaces. So essentially, it's the best workplaces in the world in our database. And overall, we have a bigger proportion of people saying at home their environment enables them to work productively compared to what the equivalent score is across the best workplaces in the world. However, now 74.2, that is the average. And sometimes averages can be a bit misleading. They might mask things that's going on within the data. So if we actually then look a bit closer at how are the respondents distributed based on their experience score, what we find is that, yes, we've got over 60% of respondents who have an outstanding experience with an LMI 70 or above, but we also have over 20%. So more than 1 in 5 employees who report a fairly poor experience, to be frank. And we've done quite a bit of digging around in the data to look at, well, what are the things that impact on one's experience? We've looked at various different demographic comparisons and looked at is it a matter of gender or age or role or and so forth. And basically the main predictor or the main factor that we've found that has an impact on your experience of working from home is the one about what sort of environment do you have available to you when you're working from home. So in the survey, we ask as a background question, where do you work when you work from home? Do you have a dedicated room for working? Do you have a dedicated area for working, but it's not an enclosed room or a separate room? Or are you doing what I do? You work from a non-work specific location. So you're by the dining table, you might be in the kitchen, you may be on the couch, and so forth. And when we then look at the experience score based on the work setting that you have available to you, we find that actually there's a massive difference between especially the two extremes, so the ones who are doing what I do and the ones who have a private office available to them. So I guess as a recap, started off by looking at what is the overall experience across employees working from home based on the data that we've collected so far, over 125,000 respondents. And what we found on average, we've seen that the experience is actually quite outstanding. Yeah, so when we look at how the respondents are distributed, we actually see that, yes, 60% have an outstanding experience, but we also find that about 1 in 5 respondents or 1 in 5 employees is having a poor experience when they're working from home. Now, then looking into what is the main determinant on, or what is the main factor that determines if you're having a good or a poor experience. After having done all the analysis on different demographics, the one thing that we really find has a big impact on your experience is what sort of setting that you work from when you work from home. And what we find there is that those who have a private room have an outstanding experience compared to those employees who basically are working from an area at home which is actually not really meant for working. And what we found when we have looked at more detailed data on this, comparing these groups, is that there's a huge difference also not only in the overall experience, but also in things like productivity and being able to maintain a healthy work-life balance and so forth. And what we need to remember here is that while it is the biggest group that actually seem to have a private room or basically a dedicated room available to them when they're working from home, so 39%, it's still a significant part of us who do work from an area at home that is actually not meant for working, so even up to 29%. Now, then again, coming back to that overall experience score of 74.2, as I keep saying, it is an average. And we also do see some quite big differences between different organizations. So far to date, since the beginning of April, the highest score that we've seen across any organization so far is an HLMI of 82.5. And those of you who joined a bit late, the LMI score is your overall experience score. And that tells you how you're generally experiencing the environment, and in this case, the home environment that you're working in. So 82.5 for the highest one, while the lowest one, the lowest scoring organization had an HLMI of 52. And that is a very significant difference. So in addition to seeing that generally we have some employees who tend to have a poorer experience, we also see that in some organizations, home working is working better. In some organizations, home working is not working as well. And we did a bit of a digging around in that as well and looked at more detailed questions to see what are the things that basically make up for those differences. So we looked at where are the gaps between the highest scoring organizations and the lowest scoring organizations. And the smallest gap we find in these items. So having access to information, generally having the tech that you need, the productivity question that I talked about, doing your individual work, and also attending planned meetings and various different video conferences. So what this means is that these are items on the left that generally most organizations have scored really well in. But then when we also found a number of items where there is actually a much bigger gap between better scoring organizations and lower scoring organizations. And as you see here, these are about sharing knowledge. So people have access to information, but at the same time, we find challenges in sharing knowledge, feeling connected to your organization and your colleagues, collaborating, and having a different sort of informal interaction with your colleagues. So essentially what it means is that some organizations have still managed to do those things well, but in some organizations, those are the items that certain employees do not feel that it's supported when they are working from home. So that was the general overview of, well, is home working? Yes, it is for some, but not for everyone and not for everything. Then I wanted to touch on the topic of how have needs and expectations possibly changed during the pandemic, and in specifically needs and expectations that then have an impact on the workplace. And I think the first thing that we need to remind ourselves when we think about expectations is the fact that if we look at the data that we collected before the pandemic, what we found in our office database is that 52% of respondents did not regularly work from home pre-COVID. Basically, they reported that they don't work from home at all during a general week with their organization. And now all of a sudden, basically, most people have been working from home. So even those employees who have previously been told it's not possible in our organization, you can't work from home, it's not allowed, now they have been doing that. And the fact is, we cannot undo and unlearn basically that experience. So if we now go back and all of a sudden say, no, you're not allowed to work from home again because it's not possible, after having done that for 6 months, I think you're going to bump into problems. So certainly this is one big one where the expectation definitely has changed among the employees. But then we can also look at, well, how has potentially work changed? And one perhaps slightly obvious, but I think it's important, so I'm going to talk about it anyways, is video conferences. So pre-COVID, in our data, only 37% of employees said that video conferencing is important to them as a part of their role. Currently, in the homeworking data, we find that number has increased. It is over 50%. If I'm perfectly honest, I find that is lower than I thought it would be. But we have certainly have organizations where that score is up in the 80s or 90s, where essentially most employees recognize video conferencing to be important. Now, I don't foresee that is going to drop back to the 37% that we saw before COVID, because even especially during the time when we still have a lot of people working from home and some people are working in the office, and also if home working is going to be or remote working, generally distributed working is going to be more common within an organization, you're kind of always going to have some people who are dialing into meetings. And then knowing that while we've been working from home, we've found that really good. So almost 89% of home workers have said that video conferencing is supported when they're working at home. And that compared then to what the score was across offices, where only 65% previously said that video conferencing was supported. I think that's going to add pressure to the workplace design, because we're going to need to support more video conferences, and we're going to have an added expectation from employees who've been used to being able to do that really well from home. And also we're going to have the added challenge with facilitating meetings where part of the employees or part of the participants are actually physically in the room, and you may have other people joining in. So how do you create the perfect dynamic for that sort of a situation? Now, another one that I want to also touch upon, perhaps even also as obvious as the video conferencing one, but also important, and I think there is an opportunity in this one, is about working with paper and printing, copying, scanning, and needing that equipment. So before COVID, almost 70% of employees or respondents in our data said that printing, copying, and scanning equipment was important to them. That proportion is slightly lower now that people have been working from home. And certainly the satisfaction with that is a whole heap lower than what we saw before. So we can safely assume that not many employees have had the access to a printer, copier, and scanner while they've been working from home. And I think there lays a bit of an opportunity there. So those employees who previously were very used to working with paper, printing things out and perhaps reading it from the paper, they've basically been forced to manage without. And perhaps there is an opportunity then there for organizations to move towards a little bit more of a paperless way of working than was before. Then further, thinking about, well, how have expectations changed? I think it is interesting to do a bit of a comparison between, well, what are the things that we've now become used to working really well now that we've been working from home? And these are now the 4 activities out of the list of 21 activities that we ask about in both the home and the office survey, where the gap is the biggest in terms of how well they're supported and in favor of the home environment. So as you can see, the activities that are best supported at home versus the office are the things like, first of all, different conversations, so private conversations, business confidential discussions, and also kind of your individual things, so thinking and reading. And again, that means that employees have become used to really having an environment that supports that really well. Coming back to the office, they're also going to want that. But not everything has been better at home. So we do have certain things where actually the scores at home have been poorer than what the scores were when we recorded it in different offices. So here, what you'll see is that, well, on one hand, it's about hosting visitors, clients, doing events, I guess, and also then the more informal and social aspect of things. So learning from others and informal social interaction. So what I think is that employees are basically certainly dying to come back to the office to do exactly these things, because these are the things that they've had on average a much poorer experience at home. Now, when you then think about, well, what are the things that employees should potentially do at home or do in the office, and what are the things that they would have a better experience doing in the office versus at home, naturally, you cannot rely on just these average scores, because these are scores from all the 5,000 workplaces that we've measured and all the 125,000 respondents that we've collected to the homeworking survey. So you need to understand how your employees are experiencing their homeworking. And you also need to remember that what you're offering in your offices, it probably also doesn't match completely the average workplace that we've measured. And just to give you a sense of how different results can be, I just wanted to quickly show you a couple of real life examples. So this is from one of the workplaces that we've measured pre-COVID. We're not going to look at the numbers at all or details. All you need to know is that these are the 21 activities that we ask about. And the color coding of this bar shows what proportion of employees in this workplace says that activity is supported. Now you see pretty much everything in this workplace is well supported. So chances are for these employees that actually their office would be supporting the things that they do better than their home environment. And in that particular workplace, almost 90% said that the office workplace enabled them to work productively. Now, imagine then if you were an employee in this workplace, and these were the scores that you reported pre-COVID in your workplace. I would argue that chances are that your home environment is a whole lot better than the office environment that may be waiting for you. And in that particular workplace, only about 25% said that the office environment enabled them to work productively, which is a whole lot lower than the scores that we saw overall in the home working data. So that then leads me to the last question. What's the role of the office in the future? And I know that there's a lot of conversation going on around, well, should the office in the future be more so a place where you go to meet because you can do your individual stuff at home? We certainly see in our data that the home environment does support individual work really well. And here I want to draw back on a piece of research that we published quite a while ago, to be honest. And this is around individual focused work. So first of all, if we look at the activity of individual work, it is one thing that we already previously called the hygiene factor of work, because it is important to pretty much everything. And that hasn't changed with COVID. Individual focused work is just as important now as it basically was before. And also what we become used to is that the home environment supports individual focused work really well. So if we then think about an environment that supports individual work or supports collaboration, basically the two axes here, an office environment that does not support individual work, nor does it support collaborative work, that is naturally an obstructor workplace. It doesn't enable the employees to do pretty much anything. So it's really obstructing the employee as an individual, and it's obstructing the organization to be basically at their best. Now, a workplace then that successfully supports both individual work and collaborative work, naturally that's a catalyst workplace. It really works as a catalyst for the individual, and it works as a catalyst for the organization. Now, a workplace that supports individual work but doesn't support collaboration, we would call that an enabler workplace. So essentially, it does support kind of the hygiene factor of work, but there's still something missing because it does not support that individual aspect of the work that it doesn't support the collaborative aspect of the work that people are meant to be doing. So I would call this almost a lost opportunity. So it's not a massive red flag necessarily, but it is a lost opportunity to really use the workplace to support the organization in the best possible way. Now, the interesting thing about what we found back a couple of years ago when we published this is that if you then think about a workplace that does not support individual work, but it does support collaboration, we would still call that an obstructor, because the individual work is basically the hygiene factor of work. It's the thing that is important, not only important to most people, it's also the thing that has the biggest impact on whether employees feel that they can work productively or not. And that is something that our data has shown. So if we go back to that conversation about workplaces for collaboration, should the office in the future basically be a place where we go to collaborate, we go to socialize, and then we do all our individual work at home? I don't think so. And I really don't hope so that that's the route that we're going to take, because we've seen it before. Workplaces that support just collaboration, it means that people can do a lot of talking, but it's really difficult to actually then get things done. And also, if you think from a practical perspective on your work, it's rare that you would have full days of just full-on collaboration and socializing, and then days of full-on head-down individual work. I at least find very much that even when I'm doing some individual focused work, every once in a while I need to basically put my head up and reflect with someone, perhaps, reflect on something or bounce off an idea that I've been working on and got stuck on when I was working on individually. So I think work is a lot more fluid than that, and you need more alteration between individual and collaboration. And therefore, I do not think that workplaces of the future should just be the hubs for collaboration while employees are meant to be doing their individual work somewhere else. So rounding up then, the main kind of highlights or conclusions from this, what I would want to say is what our data shows is home working, it seems to be working pretty well, or seems to have been working pretty well. So people do report a pretty good experience, but do remember that does not apply to everyone, and it also doesn't apply to everything. There are certain things that certainly have been a bit more challenging now that people have been working from home. Secondly, we need to remember that our roles really haven't changed. We still do the same work, but to some extent we do it in a different way. So our needs and certainly our expectations to the office and how we want to work in the future, that may and is likely to have changed. And I think what that means is that, first of all, we still do need to create outstanding workplaces for both individual and collaborative work. And also, I think that actually puts added pressure on organizations creating workplaces that really, emphasize the employee experience. So the last comment I want to make is that if you're thinking about what's next for your organization, remember that there are multiple factors that are going to impact on what is the most optimal strategy for you. You need to understand your employees' home working experience. You need to understand your office environment that you have right now and what you need to change there. But the really one thing that I want to emphasize is I hope that you make any sort of decisions with keeping the employee experience first in mind, and basically make your decisions with an aim to maximize that experience. So that's what I wanted to say today. If you enjoyed the data, please head on over to our website. We've got heaps of different reports over there. And you can also subscribe to our communication, where basically you'll get notified when we have new insights or new reports coming out, and also when we have more events coming up. So we have, for example, next week a webinar on this data and a bit more. So there's stuff that I left out. So yeah, if you're interested in that, please do get in touch over our website or drop me an email straight to my inbox. Thank you.
Dr. Peggie Rothe, great to have you with us. We haven't got any questions for you just now, Peggie, but I do have one of my own. Some really, really valuable insights from you there, all based on the data that you've collected. And I want to know, what's at stake for companies that don't pay attention to this data? We all know of companies where they're saying, well, everyone needs to get back to the office, or we're happy for everyone to work remotely. But you've really talked about the need to sort of balance the individual and the sector with some of the wider data. So for anyone listening saying, yeah, but I want to do X, Y, or Z more definitively, what's at stake for them?
Yeah, well, I would say, I mean, we've all heard the saying that the employees are the most important resource of an organization, which I actually completely disagree with. I don't think that they're the most important resource of an organization. I would say the employees are the organization. And so essentially the success and the competitiveness of any organization is in the hands of the employees. So how the employees are experiencing their work, how they're being treated, and how they can do their things and so forth is going to have a massive impact on simply the success of the organization. And I think if you completely overlook this, if you make decisions in a binary way and basically just say everyone back to the office, I think you are going to be letting your employees down, and inevitably that is going to have an impact on the bottom line sooner or later, I think.
Thanks very much, Dr. Peggie Rothe. We'll have more insights into employee experience and the value of employees coming up later during the day.